Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. In Pakistan Khabar TV special. Today we have a special guest in our studios to discuss the US-Pakistan relations, Pakistan-India relations, the South Asian integration and other issues relating to South Asia. Today we have in our studios Mr. Michael Kugelman, who is a director, South Asia Institute in Wilson Center. He has written more than 11 books regarding different issues relating to South Asia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. He regularly writes for Foreign Policy magazine. He also contributes in leading US and international media outlets, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Politico, and the other Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, all these global media outlets. And he is a very well-known figure as far as the South Asia is concerned. He is a South Asia expert, and he is an analyst, columnist, researcher, and analyst. And so it's a great honor and pleasure to have here today in our studios, and we will discuss different issues, subjects, and with the Mr. Michael today. Welcome, Mr. Michael, to our show today.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure and honor to have here today, because I know you are very busy, but you still spare some time for this interview.
That's very kind. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yes, and also welcome to Lahore for the first time. I think you're visiting Lahore for the first time?
Not the first time, but it's been a few years since I've last been to Lahore.
Okay. Yeah. It's really great to have you here. So I will start with my first question, and that is regarding that how you view the US-Pakistan relations at the moment, because we have seen a very good relations. Pakistan was one of the closest allies of the US, and that was the case for most of the 60 or 70 years. But we also we also can see that like 1980s, at the end of 1980s, at the beginning of 1990s, the relationship was not very good.
Right.
But also now, there's not a very big, the relationship is not as warm as it was when General Musharraf was in the government. And Pakistan was a non-NATO ally of the US, and there was dollars were coming into Pakistan, and Musharraf was, and the other leaders when they visited US at the time.
Right.
There was red carpet receptions and all these things. But now, they are not even like to make a phone call to the Pakistani president or the prime minister. And even our former prime minister, Imran Khan, he complained about that. He was waiting for President Biden's call, but he never get it when he was ousted from the power. So, what are the main reasons you think that the relationship is not as good as it was in the past?
Right. So first of all, President Biden actually did have a very quick call with Shehbaz Sharif soon after he became prime minister, which was quite notable.
Yeah.
But indeed, you're right. I mean, the relationship is not what it used to be, and as you said, it has been a roller coaster. There are good times, there are bad times. Yes. I would argue that we have to go back to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. That's when I think the relationship really experienced a shift, because for many years, U.S. officials tended to look at the relationship with Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan.
Yes.
And I don't think that's a good idea, but that's what happened. So once you had U.S. Forces leave Afghanistan, once Afghanistan became less of a significant issue in U.S. policy, that meant that the U.S.-Pakistan relationship essentially lost its identity. It lost its anchor. And so ever since then, it's been in search of a new identity. Now, I'll say this. I mean, the good news is that there's no crisis in the relationship right now. There's no big tension point. And we know in the years past, Raymond Davis, the bin Laden raid, go back before that, sanctions for nuclear weapons program, it seems like there was always some type of tension point. But the relationship is stable now because there's no tension point. But I would argue that it's been adrift, and it's looking for a new anchor. And in Washington, officials want to reframe the relationship, that it focuses more on trade and economic cooperation, but the view in Washington is you can't really make much progress with that until Pakistan's economy is stabilized, until there's indications of a reforms plan. And that's why it's a bit stuck right now. So it's in a good place. It's not, there's no crisis, but at the same time, it's become more narrowly focused. It's not as much of a strategically significant relationship for the U.S. And so I think this is why we're not seeing the multifaceted, bigger relationship we'd seen in previous years.
There's a general perception in Pakistan that U.S. is not interested in the economic development of Pakistan. I know that US aid, is, they spend billions of dollars every year in education, in health, in infrastructure development, on the other social uplift projects. But the private investment, into Pakistan is not visible really for the people. And so there's a general perception that Americans are not interested in the economic development of Pakistan, like the infrastructure development, as Chinese have shown in the past, in the past few years. They have invested heavily in the infrastructure projects, in energy and the other things. So how you view that perception? You think it's a right perception, or there's a gap between the reality and the perception?
Right. I mean, certainly there are a lot of public perceptions here about the U.S. and U.S. policy. I think some of them are correct and others are not. And on this front, on this issue of this notion that the U.S. is not interested in Pakistan's economic development, I would push back against that. I mean, if you look at the track record over time, particularly U.S. government spending, public sector investments in Pakistan's development, U.S. funds have been used to build hospitals and schools and dams and make repairs to infrastructure. And I think that one problem here is that I think many in Pakistan, particularly the younger generations, may not know about that, because a lot of that happened many years ago. These big infrastructure development projects that happened way before CPEC. We're talking about decades ago. And so newer generations wouldn't be aware of that. But even today, I mean, U.S. aid, it's still quite active here in the sense that it's contributing to projects dealing with education, with energy security, with water issues, a variety of issues there. Indeed, it's been dwarfed by CPEC, though. So the contemporary comparison between the U.S. and China, absolutely China takes the prize because of everything that CPEC has done, even though CPEC has run out of momentum. But if you look at the history of U.S. development policy in Pakistan, there's been a lot. And you and your audience will be very familiar with the KLB, with the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill. It was controversial in Pakistan, but the goal of that was to increase development assistance to Pakistan. It tripled development assistance, and those funds were used for a variety of purposes related to development. Now, I will say that private sector investment is not as big from the U.S. You do have a U.S.-Pakistan Business Council in Washington, which has a membership of large companies that are active here, but I think that, quite frankly, many private investors have not been comfortable investing here because of the initially security problems, terrorism risks, but more recently just concerns about the investment climate, the regulatory policies, the taxation policies, red tape, bureaucracy, corruption concerns. So I think this has been a limitation on U.S. private sector investment here too.
Do you think that the Pakistan-American relations will improve in the near future? There are chances, or we still have to wait for more years?
Right. I don't see the relationship changing either for the better or the worse anytime soon, just because we have an election in the U.S. later this year. So I think that if there's going to be any changes to the relationship, it would only happen when there's a new administration. But I think that there's some geopolitical constraints that I think make it difficult to expand the relationship. Both countries, the U.S. and Pakistan, both have strong, growing relations with the other country's biggest rival, right? The U.S. has this growing partnership with India, and Pakistan, of course, has its long-standing relationship with China. The main U.S. foreign policy goal is great power competition, countering China, and of course, Pakistan is close to China, so there's constraints there. But I think that if you can get the two sides together, if you can get the policy space in Washington to dedicate the time to having some type of dialogue to discuss what are the common interests now, what can be the new anchors for the relationship, there could be some potential there to grow it out. I do think counterterrorism could make a comeback as an area of cooperation in this relationship, just because U.S. officials are increasingly concerned about the ISK threat based in Afghanistan. I'm not saying that we're going to see another case of the U.S. using military bases in Pakistan. We're not going to see that, but so I think there's some potential there. But the U.S. During the Trump administration froze security assistance to Pakistan. It's still frozen. So until that aid is unfrozen, you can't expect much improvements in the security relationship.
Historically, there's a perception that when the Democrats come to power in America, they're not very interested to develop relations with Pakistan. There's always been a low side of that. But when the Republicans came into power, they always helped Pakistan. But there's another aspect to that the Republicans, they love to work with the military establishment in Pakistan. They're more comfortable working with the military establishment than the civilian leadership in Pakistan. Do you agree with that, or do you think it's just a misconception or a myth?
Yeah, I think that there's pretty strong multi-partisan support in the U.S. about how to engage with Pakistan, and that tends to involve emphasizing relations with the military leaders. So I think Democrats and Republicans, I don't think either party has been more inclined to have a bad relationship with Pakistan. I think it's more a reflection of other developments. It doesn't have to do with whatever party is in power in the White House, right? I mean, we saw when Barack Obama was in power that early on in his administration, of course this is a Democratic administration, early on there was a lot of good things happening in the relationship. There was a strategic dialogue that was formed by Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. The idea was to broaden the relationship, but then all of a sudden you had all these crises in the relationship. In 2011 it hit rock bottom. That was the Barack Obama era as well. Donald Trump, a Republican, right? Things started off really bad with Pakistan because he said in that New Year's tweet in 2018, he said some unpleasant things about Pakistan. Aid was frozen, but then you look at later in Trump's term, all of a sudden he was hosting Imran Khan in Washington because he wanted Khan to help him get U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. So you see that there's different. The relationship, I think it's driven not by domestic political factors in Washington, but more just whatever other issues, geopolitical issues that relate to the relationship more broadly.
There's always been a concern in Pakistan. That when U.S. need Pakistan in the power struggle, with the other powers like the Soviet Union in the past, and now China, and the U.S. want to counter the growing influence of China. So it is a general belief in Pakistan, not among the intellectuals, but also among the general population, that America use Pakistan when it needed, and once the American interests are over, or they no more need Pakistan, they just ditch Pakistan, they just abandon Pakistan.
Right.
And they give the example like 1989 when the Soviet Union withdraw troops from Afghanistan. America introduced imposed the Pressler amendments, and they stopped the military aid to Pakistan. Also, other sanctions were also imposed when the civilian government came into power, a democratic government came into power. How you view that thing that? Because one thing I understand, that America is a superpower, Pakistan is compared to a weak country. You can't have an equal relationship between a superpower and a weaker country. But apart from that, the people who born since 1988 or 89, they haven't seen a great relationship between the two countries, and they have also seen that. When America needs Pakistan in Afghanistan, so we get aid, we get loans, we get everything, everything, and our leader love to visit Washington, and the American officials more regularly come to Pakistan. But no, it's not happening, and people feel that America has abandoned Pakistan, and now it's a charm offensive with India, and it's offering. You have written extensively on that. U.S. India technology cooperation.
Right.
I read some of your stuff on that. So you can enlighten us on that aspect also, that why it happened. We understand that because the geopolitics is changing. The rise of China has changed the situation in the region.
Right.
But still, many Pakistanis are still wondering, why all the time this happens, and
Yeah, no, see, we've talked about various perceptions here about
Yeah.
U.S. policy, and I think I've pushed back on some, but this one, I think there's something to this one, in the sense that indeed, I mean, twice, right, the U.S. has left Afghanistan, and after that's happened, the relationship with Pakistan has been downgraded. The first time, eventually, you had sanctions on Pakistan some years after. We're not going to see that this time. But I think that this gets to a key feature of the relationship itself. It's a transactional one. It's not a deep strategic partnership where there's going to be a close partnership no matter what. It's a relationship driven by tactical considerations. And I think that's unfortunate. And I know there's been metaphors in Pakistan about this idea of the U.S. Using Pakistan like a used tissue. That, you don't need it anymore, you just set it away.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that if you look at the development assistance category, we have seen in both cases after the U.S. withdrawals from Afghanistan, both times, that development assistance to Pakistan has continued. And looking at the current situation, the last 2 years since the U.S. withdrawal, yeah, the relationship has been toned down, it's been narrowed down, but the U.S. continues to be one of the biggest bilateral donors of Pakistan. Certainly in the context of humanitarian assistance, it stepped up in a big way after the floods a few years back. And if you look at the pandemic, even now, even today, I think, several years after the pandemic receded, the U.S. has sent more pandemic vaccines to Pakistan than any other country other than Bangladesh, I think. So I think that this is not going to be in the news. This is not trendy stuff. It doesn't involve arms sales or anything like that. But I think that the U.S. is doing things to indicate that it still hasn't forgotten Pakistan. It considers it an important country. It's not going about taking punitive steps against Pakistan. I mean, it is pushing ahead in its relationship with India, but that's not out of spite against Pakistan. It's because of great power competition with China. So I think that the perception is accurate, but at the same time, I would argue that at least this time around, this time after getting out of Afghanistan, the U.S. isn't trying to completely wash its hands of Pakistan and move on completely. And you do have high-level visits. There's going to be a high-level visit of U.S. officials in the coming days. There is a desire in Washington to talk to Pakistan about how to reframe the relationship. Climate change has been a big, ambitious hope for cooperation on the part of the U.S. Clean energy. The DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, a U.S. government agency, has explored infrastructure investments here. Again, can't do what China's doing, but so what I'm saying is that through non-security means, the U.S. is looking to do what it can to see what the possibilities are for maintaining cooperation with Pakistan.
Can you explain our audience the type of the technology cooperation that is going on between India and America? Because in Pakistan, people are more focused on the nuclear side of it.
Right. Yeah.
But the civilian side of the technology transfer, how it's taking place, how big it is, and how it is impacting the relations between U.S. and India.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of tech cooperation, and it is fueled by great power competition considerations.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest examples is semiconductors.
Yeah.
Semiconductors have been described as a new oil for these days. It's a big deal. They power so many things. So the U.S. is working with India to try to strengthen India's capacity to become a global semiconductors manufacturer. And so there is an agreement signed between the U.S. and India on semiconductors recently. They have this critical and emerging technology initiative that's overseen by the NSCs in both countries. And the idea, again, it's to put India in a position where it can establish these semiconductor development factories. And the goal is to push back against China's own capacities as a semiconductors manufacturer, and also to drive major global tech firms out of China and over to India. So yeah, this is all for civilian purposes. It's strategic. It's because of great power competition. But I think this is this is a very good example. Now, there are still some tensions between the U.S. and India on tech cooperation, on policy issues. One of them is what was described as export controls, which essentially makes it difficult for the U.S. to share technologies with India. But given the nature of this relationship, how strong it is, they've set up working groups and dialogue mechanisms to work through the differences on export controls and other things. But you're just seeing a lot more technological exchanges, more intelligence sharing. particularly U.S. intelligence being shared with India. And this has made it, the goal here is to make it easier for India to deter Chinese border incursions over the border into India.
Okay. So what is your opinion regarding the, this question that India and Pakistan relations are very strained, and no trade is taking place officially, and that there's a tension.
Right.
Do you think that the US can play some role in de-escalating the situation or defusing, the situation, and also to improve the relations between India and Pakistan? Can US facilitate both the countries, both the governments to sit together and
Right.
to have a discussion and improve the relations, at least live like normal neighbors,
Right, exactly.
not as two enemies who are
Yeah.
fighting with or intend to fight with each other all the time.
Nuclear armed enemies
Nuclear
and
armed, yeah,
neighbors,
yes,
yeah. So this is one of the ironies of U.S. policy, that the U.S. has always had a strong interest in India and Pakistan getting along, having a stable relationship, but the U.S. is not willing to mediate. It's not willing to preemptively play the role of mediator, because these days it knows that India doesn't want that to happen, because India worries that any third-party mediation in its tensions with Pakistan would mean the focus would turn to Kashmir, and India's view is that Kashmir is not to be discussed anymore, unless it's AJK. But of course, that's not what Pakistan is going to want to discuss. So, this means that India doesn't want third-party mediation, and the U.S. honors that. So, what ends up happening is when you have a major crisis or an actual conflict between India and Pakistan, as you did with Kargil most recently, and then of course the brief Balakot Pulwama crisis, the U.S. does intervene diplomatically to try to diffuse tensions, but it's not willing to do that preemptively, which you could argue amounts to shooting yourself in the foot. You're making it more likely that there's going to be another crisis if you don't intervene diplomatically, but this is the U.S. policy. So U.S. officials would like to see India and Pakistan opening up more border trade, but you're not going to see U.S. officials push the two sides to work toward that goal. My own view is that it's a fool's errand. I don't think India, particularly with Modi in charge, and he's going to stay in charge, he's going to win his election, I think. Modi's India would have no interest in reopening trade with Pakistan. So I think it's a bit of a fool's errand, but I think that Washington is with Islamabad on this. It wants to see more trade, not just because it would make the relationship better between India and Pakistan, but it could potentially provide economic benefits for Pakistan.